So today we will explain you how you will be able to deliver desktops and applications inside Digital Workspace. So typically using Workspace ONE and VMware Horizon. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Stefan Padik. I am a SE in end user computing for VMware. Johan.
And I'm Johan van Amersfoort. I'm an EUC architect working for ITQ Consultancy based in the Netherlands.
Thank you, Johan. So let's go. A very quick disclaimer. Our presentation may contain some references to product features that are still under development. So just keep in mind this is future features with no commitment yet. So for today, three main points. First, we will come back to how Workspace ONE can help you provide that digital workspace in your enterprise, so easing the way your end users will access their applications. Then we will go to a deep focus on how you will be able to integrate your virtual desktops and applications coming from Horizon into that digital workspace. And hopefully, Johan, will be delivering a great demo.
Yeah, we basically every part of functionality that we're going to show in the slides, we're trying to get it in the demo as well. So great. A lot of demo stuff.
Nice. Thank you. So let's come back to Workspace ONE. So as an introduction, Workspace ONE is born because of an issue we are all meeting today. Up to recently, IT was quite simple. You had desktops on your premises, you had some servers delivering some applications, and controlling the way people were consuming those applications was quite easy. You just had to control and manage the desktops in order to make things possible. Things have changed dramatically since then, and typically your applications are not always running inside your own premises. You are now using applications coming from the cloud. You are also facing users with new requirements, new needs, such as using mobile devices, such as using non-Windows environments, using a nice Mac OS instead of Windows desktops. So a lot of new things are changing, and it's not only a technical change, it's also the way people are addressing and are consuming the service you are providing to them. So typically, the challenge we are facing is how could we bridge those two worlds? You still have the requirement to access to, I would say, client-server applications, to Windows applications, while still having to move to this new mobile era. And typically, the technical challenge we are facing with that is that typically in the client-server era, you had full control over the applications thanks to that client-server infrastructure with domain-driven machines. You had to deal with network security on your premises. That was quite simple but quite static as well. Some downside with that is that your OPEX ratio was quite high because of the number of people required to maintain this kind of infrastructure. If we are talking about mobile way of doing things, you see that typically the ratio of the number of administrators required to manage the users or the devices is totally different. This is why we are all moving to such a new way of delivering applications. We are talking about enrollment of devices. We are not talking about managing, joining a device. We are talking about something that is absolutely critical here. We are managing users. We are transforming into a user-centric way of doing things, not a device-centric way of doing things, which implies to have a strong identity managed-based security model. So it's not device-based, it's identity and user-based model. But all in all, we still have to deliver applications. Probably someone in the room still have to deliver that kind of applications coming from mainframes. Command, it still exists. We may have also some true legacy Windows applications. We also have applications that do rely on very old versions of browsers. Typically, you still have applications requiring Internet Explorer 6. You also may have new applications coming. Come on, a lot of mobile applications, public applications, private applications. and SaaS applications as well. So typically now we have to deal with all that kind of applications and let users access them the way they want. They want to consume those applications like they do in their everyday life. And our challenge today is to make them allow to access that easily and securely. So typically the way we are bridging those two worlds is, of course, to use Workspace ONE. So Workspace ONE is providing both all the identity management mechanisms that will allow you to set up access policies based on user identity and user posture. We will see that during the demo in particular. And it is also able to leverage all the other technologies we are providing in end-user computing. So depending on what we are addressing, there is always a technology that will help you to integrate any application to your catalog.
And on top of that, one of the things that people think is that Workspace ONE is a product. Well, to the end user, it is indeed a product. So that's showed there as well. The end user will have just a single app to access all of their resources, but Workspace ONE from an IT perspective is a suite with basically all products that are needed so that every type of application can be distributed to the end user.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually what we are trying to achieve here is to provide a way to consume applications, so a consumer simple experience for your end users, no matter the device they are using, anywhere, anytime, any device. But from a security perspective, from an IT perspective, we need to make sure that this is not compromising our security and the way we are accessing applications and data. And this is what we are doing today with Workspace ONE. So from an end user perspective, what do they see? What do they see is only a catalog. And from that catalog, they will be able to launch any kind of applications. That catalog will be available either from the desktop, from a web browser, from a mobile device, from any device. They will have the ability to connect and to see and access to their applications. If we do a short focus on the mobile catalog, we also leverage the capabilities of each platform. A good example is the way we are providing SSO to users using their mobile device. So typically, if you are using an Android or an iOS phone, you will have the ability to SSO just using your fingerprint. So let's go now deeper in how we could add those virtual desktops and remote applications inside Workspace ONE catalog and allow users to access those applications from any device.
Sure. Right. So as you can see, Workspace ONE can incorporate different kinds of application platforms. So first of all, and the one that we're going to show later on in the demo as well, is Horizon 7. So Horizon 7 is able to distribute both virtual applications, published applications, virtual desktops, and cloud pod architecture, which we will cover later on in some other slides, and single sign-on, of course. You don't want to bother a user with a lot of passwords or complex types of authentication methods on an iPhone, for instance, while an iPhone has a fingerprint reader, which you could also use for authentication methods. So we'll cover that as well. And of course our Horizon Air and Horizon Cloud offerings, which are the SaaS-based offerings, which we can incorporate in the portal as well. And finally, support for Citrix. If companies have an existing Citrix platform, such as Zen Desktop or Zen app, we can incorporate those applications in the portal as well. So let's dive deeper into Horizon. So like I mentioned, we have two types of offerings. We have the Horizon Cloud versions, which can be placed both from the cloud as well as a mixed mode in on-premises as well. We call that Horizon mode hybrid mode, sorry. But we're going to focus on the on-premises Horizon deployment. So the on-premises Horizon deployment, as you can see here, consists in conjunction with IDM of a couple of components. So first of all, we have the Horizon client, of course, and that can either be the native Horizon client or it can be the web-based client. As soon as a user authenticates, he will authenticate to the identity manager. And one of the biggest misconceptions is that the identity manager tunnels those connections towards the connection server. But that's not true. The identity manager itself is a platform that should be accessible through the internet as well as on premises. And for the connection server, that's the same thing. So the connection server needs to be accessible both from on-premises as well from internet-facing users. So the user logs on, authenticates to the identity manager, and the identity manager requests all resources, checks if a user is entitled, and as soon as he is entitled, he will get a session allocated. The user then directly connects towards the RDSH farm or a virtual desktop, and he gets access to his application or desktop. And of course, we can deliver that both through Blast Extreme as well as PC over IP. But in the demo, we're going to focus on Blast Extreme as well. So if you look at the Horizon 7 integration, it's basically an application. So what we do is we configure an application catalog for those Horizon applications. I will cover that in the demo as well.
So Johan, I agree, it's quite easy to add a Horizon application, Horizon desktop to the catalog, but then don't we have some, I would say, challenge? Because when I want to use my Horizon client, usually I use my user ID, my password, my ID password, and I'm already connected through VIDM using, for example, my RSA token. So I have to connect twice, to log in twice. It's not SSO.
Yeah, that's a challenge. So if a user, for instance, uses his or her iPhone to authenticate to a remote desktop or application, and he uses his fingerprint reader or an other form of multi-factor authentication, no password is used in that scenario. And we are unable to use that form of authentication in a remote desktop. We're not able to parse those passwords to that remote session. What we did to solve that issue is that we introduced True SSO. So True SSO provides the end user with a really true single sign-on experience, which we will show in the demo, of course, as well. And we can do that with all kinds of multi-factor authentication. So we'll cover Verify, VMware Verify as the multi-factor authentication piece, but we can incorporate RSA with both secure ID as well as tokens, and basically every form of radius authentication. So
how does it work? What do we do with TrueSSO?
So what we do is when a user authenticates to the identity manager from either his, from a device, the user selects the Horizon desktop or application. When the user hits that desktop or application, a short-lived certificate is generated from the CA. So a CA must be part of the solution. Certificate is generated, and by requesting that certificate, the SAML
assertion?
Yeah, assertion is inserted in the client. Thanks. So again, the certificate is generated, and we'll show that in the demo as well, and the user doesn't have to enter their username and password at all. So he was firstly authenticated in the app, in the Workspace ONE app, or the website, so the web application, and he doesn't have to authenticate anymore.
So this provides some great benefits, because it's not because I'm lazy, it's not because I can provide just one way of authenticating through the VIDM portal, Workspace ONE portal to Horizon. This provides additional advantages, so that doing this, you can provide users with strong method of authentications. You can provide authentication coming from other IDPs you may have already on your premises. And one good benefit I usually see at my customer site is having the ability to provide authentication to users who shouldn't even know about their own password in your Active Directory. Typically, if you need to provide access to Windows applications to someone who is not part of your employees.
Yeah,
that's a good way to do that.
And one side note, if your primary method of authentication in either the Workspace ONE app or the web app is the username and password, True SSO doesn't have that benefit, because at that moment in time, through authentication, we already know the password, and that's when we can parse it through the SAML insertion.
Sure, absolutely. So, tell me if I'm wrong, if I understand correctly how it works. So, first, my user will probably authenticate against the IDM, so the portal of Workspace ONE, so get a SAML accession. Then the user will probably click on the application, launch the application, which will trigger his Horizon client. So then the Horizon client will go to the broker. The broker will then check the SAML assertion with Identity Manager, then goes to enrollment service, right?
The enrollment service, yes.
Which creates a certificate.
Yes.
And then we can prevent the certificate to virtual desktop, and we're done.
And we're done.
Oh, nice.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
sounds easy, no? It sounds easy, right?
Yeah, it sounds quite easy. Come on. So, what do we need to do this? Tell me.
First of all, of course, Horizon 7. Since Horizon 7, the enrollment server was introduced as a part of the architecture, and we need that, of course. So, the Horizon enrollment servers, and we need a recent Horizon client. So, everything from version 4 and up supports this method of SAML insertion. The Identity Manager, of course, could be either the on-premises deployment or a SaaS deployment, starting from version 2.9 and up. And really important, because we during the enrollment, we need a Active Directory membership of the Identity Manager, because the Identity Manager needs to be part of the AD to trigger tasks to the AD. And of course the CA. Because we're going to use an enrollment type based on certificate generation, we need the CA to being able to do that. And it needs to be a Microsoft CA as well.
Okay, easy in fact. But we have just solved one part of the problem.
Yes.
What if I'm using my Horizon client and point it directly to my connection server? Or does it work then?
Well, that's a challenge. So, who's familiar with IDP init? So the most, let me explain the IDP init. So what happens if you use a Identity Manager solution and you use your credentials to authenticate? If you start an application and the SAML insertion is able, the SAML token will be inserted in the application, that's what we call an IDP init. So the identity provider will initiate the authentication of the application, and you're authenticated. But what happens if you start the application directly without being authenticated through the IDP? Then you're not able to start that application. An example, for instance, is if you log on to Office 365. You first need to be authenticated with your Active Directory AD, so the Azure AD, before you can start the Office 365. And Office 365 will first direct you to Azure AD. Well, the same thing is with Identity Manager. So if we start an Horizon client directly and we're not yet authenticated, we need to be authenticated first. So what we introduced in Horizon 7.2 is SP init, which basically means that if we start an Horizon application from both the web app as well as the Horizon client, and we're not authenticated yet, we'll first send you, the end user, to the Identity Manager portal, log him in, and as soon as he is authenticated, he will be directly directed to the application, either the Horizon client or, like I mentioned, the web app. And we'll cover that in the demo as well.
Okay, so if I understand well, doing this with, it's a Workspace ONE mode, right?
Yeah.
So if we do that, we make sure that any connection to the Horizon platform will be secured and managed through the VIDM and its access policies.
Yes.
That's great. So, do we have some limitations? I guess we do at the moment.
Yeah. So again, we introduced in Horizon 7.2, so it's only supported from Horizon 7.2 and above. And it's currently supported for the browser-based flow, which means that the native Workspace ONE app doesn't support this yet, but that will probably come in the future, I would say.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll cover the latest bullet later on in the demo. You will see that that limitation might not
absolutely.
really exist.
One gotcha here. There is one issue you may have the first time you are setting up session configuration. This is because of the default configuration of the connection servers. By default, the metadata that is sent by Horizon as a service provider to IDM will expire in about 24 hours. So there is some things to do in addition to configuring the settings you saw in the previous slide. It is well documented in documentation, the product documentation, and as well on a knowledge base. So just pay attention to change the expire period so that it is longer than the sync and the refresh that will happen between VIDM and Horizon for synchronizing entitlements and resources. Okay, one other thing that we can do now with Workspace ONE is when we are using Horizon Cloud Pod, can you tell us more what's an Horizon Cloud Pod?
Yeah, who's familiar with Horizon Cloud Pod architecture? Oh, quite some people. So for those who aren't aware of it, Horizon Cloud Pod architecture was introduced in Horizon 6, basically to support first really big environments that exceed the 10,000 desktop limit. And also there's a component in Horizon called the Java messaging bus, which communicates between the connection servers and the broker that brokers the desktops. That part has a latency constraint, so the latency between those components cannot be, it's intolerant, latency intolerant. So what we did with Cloud Pod architecture is we basically create two autonomous Horizon setups, or Horizon pods, if you will. And like we know universal groups in Active Directory, we create global entitlements. So in a normal, in a single pod environment, you have local entitlements. The user gets entitled to a desktop or application, and he can access it. With Cloud Pod architecture, we'll create global entitlements that exceed the pod limit, and will be synced between all the connection servers in all pods. So the user connects, gets a home site, so a preferred site, accesses global entitlement, which will be linked to either of the two pods, and he will be able to access applications or desktops. Well, if we add the IDM component to that architecture, what we'll do, and we'll cover that in the next slide.
Absolutely.
We'll add all connection servers from a pod, and add the connection servers from the other pod as well, and add the federation, including a single namespace in which the user will connect towards IDM. So the user will always connect towards the single namespace of the complete Cloud Pod architecture, and we'll redirect them towards that namespace.
Okay, so if we come back to the configuration of VIDM and integrating with such a pod, the first thing you may have to do is to point to your first pod, right?
Yeah, because we need to retrieve entitlements. So what we'll do is we'll add connection servers of the first pod, and in the next slide.
Sorry.
Right. We'll add them, we'll save them, and we'll sync them, because you need those entitlements first. The IDM will retrieve all the global entitlements, and after you did that, you can add the federation. So at the federation, again, we can add the federation name. You'll add the launch URL, which is the global namespace of your Cloud Pod architecture, and you can select any of the pods that you want to add to that. After you saved, it's configured and the user is able to use cloud architecture within IDM.
Okay, so if I understand well, with that kind of integration, no matter where I am, when I'm pointing to my Workspace ONE catalog, it will direct me to the right pod and the right desktop.
Absolutely, but to be able to do that, we need another component which wasn't on the architecture picture we showed before, and it's of course a global load balancer. So we need a global load balancer, such as an F5 GTM, in front of the cloud architecture, which has that namespace configured on it, based on a virtual IP.
Nice.
Okay.
Time for the demo now.
Demo time.
Let's go.
Right. We should switch to 3, I guess. And there we are. So what we see here is, first of all, my connection server. So I have a connection server set up, which is here. I log in as my admin account. And of course, it locks me. That's good. So some things that you can see here that are set up. First of all, we have true SSO set up for my local Active Directory. We have, of course, the connection servers, and as you can see, we have a SAML authentication pre-configured. So we need to configure that SAML authentication to be able to insert that SAML token to the desktop. Let's go back to my Horizon client. So when I start the client, use my user to, of course, to authenticate. I have one single entitled desktop. What I did here is basically configure Blast with HTML access, so I can access my desktop. And because I used my login credentials, such as my username and password, these are already parsed into my desktop. So no true SSO is needed for that solution. So the first thing I would like to show you is when I log off again, is the authentication bit in the Horizon server. So is it? Yeah, it's viewable. When I go to my view configuration and my servers, we have the connection servers tab, and there is my primary connection server. So I have a single pod with a single connection server set up. In the edit screen, we have the authentication tab, and currently it's set to allowed. We have 3 options. The first is disabled, so no SAML insertion is used. The second one is allowed, which allows you to either connect and authenticate on the web portal or the client, as well as using IDM. And I'll set it up to allowed first. We'll show the other options as well during the demo. So I've been logged off, and here is my Workspace ONE portal. As you can see, my user is already there because I logged in before, and if I authenticate here, you can see that the entitled desktop was retrieved with a synchronization, and in my Workspace ONE app, at my user settings, I can configure either the Horizon client to connect or my browser to connect. Well, first I would like to show you again the browser. See what happens. So if I connect towards the desktop, you can see that really briefly that the web app was started and I was authenticated directly. So my SAML credentials were inserted in the session, and I could authenticate without any hassle of re-entering my username and password. Right, so the next thing I would like to show is the Workspace ONE mode. So I configure the SAML insertion, the SAML configuration to required. So now I'm always required to authenticate to my IDM portal first before I can access my desktops and applications. What I'll do is I already pre-configured my SAML authenticator, which is IDM, of course. And when I enable Workspace 1, I enter my workspace.url, and as a security issue, you don't want older clients to connect towards your environment if they don't support this feature. So we can block connections to avoid that. So this will reduce your security risks in that certain area. So what I'll do now is sign out. So as you can see, I'm not authenticated at this moment. I'll make sure that I'm not logged into my Horizon client as well. And if I now try to access my environment, I'm redirected, repointed to IDM first to authenticate. And after authentication,
okay, so now every time I'm connecting, logging in, I'm using the VIDM authentication first.
Yes.
No authentication will take place on the connection
Correct.
server. Great.
Yeah, so let's talk Horizon client. I will log off again. And close this. And I will start my Horizon client. So I have the legacy client as well. You can see here my phone is there. I will show you later on why that is. As you can see, I have my connection server set up here. So as soon as I hit my desktop, I'm directed. Oh, that shouldn't have been happening. I was authenticated first. Yeah. So I'm directly pointed out to my IDM appliance when using the native Horizon client, sorry. And when I authenticate.
Okay, so now my users are all forced to go through the IDM. So
Absolutely.
my security policies will be applied at 100%.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. So that's good. I mean, we were using a user and password. So in fact, even if TrueSSO was not activated, it could have worked.
It could have worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What if we change the policy now?
Yeah, so let's change the policy. What I'll do first is go back to my management environment. And I have here my admin interface of Workspace 1. So this is the admin console. As you can see here, I have an application catalog which just contains one application which was synced. I have on the Identity and Access Management tab my different methods of authentication. So like I mentioned in the slides earlier, we have different forms of authentication, of which the password, of course, is the standard one, but we can configure all sorts of authentication, like I mentioned, such as RSA, VMware Verify, which we'll look up a look in the demo, and one that's pretty interesting is the device compliancy. So we could leverage the power of AirWatch to check for device compliancy, and if a device isn't compliant, you will not get access to a certain application. Configure and verify is pretty simple. Hit the box, enter a code, and you're done from a server perspective. And what I could do now is, what I first show you is the default access policy. So every device that connects towards the identity manager configuration is run through these policies. And as you can see at the left part, you see two different network ranges. One is my private range, So as I connect from a private network, such as my office, I get these two authentication methods first. If I connect through the internet, which is basically all other networks, with any type of device, I can set up different authentication methods. But okay, this is for authenticating to the appliance. What we want to do is leverage different authentication policies to different applications.
So this is one point here. Usually people ask me, the way we are evaluating those policies as an order, so it's always from the top to down. So
yes.
You have the ability to change the order of the policies on this page.
Yeah, it's really important to create a layered policy, a layered policy environment, compared to a firewall. If you start with the deny all rule before all other rules, no one will be able to connect to any thing through the firewall. So you need to granularly add those rules and start top down. So the application, what we can do in the application catalog is open up the application. As you can see, I have entitled users and I have the ability to create access policies. So what I'll do, go to my policies tab and add a policy. We call this policy app policy and select an application. So select this application, and the things that we're going to do next is select a form of authentication. So my device is connected to the internet, so I'll select my all network, and in this case I'm using a macOS. I'll add my group.
Okay, so you can even have a distinct policy depending on the group of the users, the identity of the users won't get the same policies. Nice.
Yeah, and the good thing is that we're already using Active Directory, for instance, for security groups from our, well, call them legacy way of managing managing our permissions based on role-based access. We can do that here as well. So you can select your security groups from an IDM security perspective as well. So the next thing we'll do is select an authentication method. And I set up verify specifically to do this. And if I basically save it, we're all set. You can see here it says 0 applications, but if I refresh my screen, yeah, it's set for 1 application. Okay, one side note, because I already used my mobile device to use verify, but if the user didn't configure it yet, so he's a first-time user with verify, and he accesses an application, you will get a push notification that says you have to add your phone number. So the user adds his phone number, and when he saves the phone number, he's directly set and able to use verify. So it's that easy. So again, you can see here my phone with my Workspace ONE app and my verify app. That's over here. And as soon as I authenticate.
So here the default access policy is applied because this is like log on to the catalog.
Yeah, and what I'll do is, again, this works both with the browser as well as the Horizon client, and I will use the browser in this case. So, if I open up my desktop, I'll immediately get the message that an action is required. And as you can see on my phone, I just received a push notification. I can use my thumbprint to authenticate, and when I approve the push notification, I am immediately directed to my application or desktop.
Wow.
This is the moment that the token was generated. The token was generated by the CA. It was inserted in my session, and without any form of authentication in my session, I'm directly connected to my desktop. So yeah, what we try to do here is that the way we authenticate in our daily stuff, like for instance, if I want to do money transfers, I can use my thumbprint on my phone to do that as well. So why not leverage the power of the things that we are experiencing at home and leverage that in our business use as well? Because it's easy, it's simple, and it's secure.
Thank you very much, Juan. Nice demo. So we are using TrueSSO, we are using Workspace ONE mode.
Yes.
In addition, we could use also VMware Verify as a cool way to authenticate through a mobile device.
Yeah, VMware Verify is included in Identity Manager.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that with Workspace ONE Advanced,
yes,
you are entitled to use VMware Verify as another way of authenticating. Yes,
absolutely.
Correctly. Nice. Thank you very much, Johan.
Welcome.
So now I think it's time for taking some questions. Any questions? Oh, the mic is coming.
Thank you. iPhone just announced facial recognition. Is this going to be integrated into the authentication as well? Facial.
Facial recognition.
Yes.
Facial.
Yeah. Oh, right. Good question. Identity Manager leverages the power of local device authentication. So an iPhone, if you could use your fingerprint on an iPhone to authenticate to the Workspace ONE app.
I think you are probably referring to a new iPhone that came out recently, right? Okay. Probably. I mean, when you are in such an application such as Verify, but also in the Workspace ONE mobile app, this application is leveraging the device capabilities for protecting the certificates that we are using under the hood. So I couldn't commit yet, but my perception is that if we are able to use a thumbprint to trigger this authentication locally, we should be able to do the same with facial recognition. But I can't commit yet, but I think this would be possible, yes.
Any more questions?
Question? The mic is coming.
The level of security of the VMware Verify authentication can be compared with the two-factor authentication?
Well, two-factor authentication is the method of authentication for the end user. So the user basically doesn't know anything of TrueSSO. What we do in TrueSSO is leverage the certificate enrollment for authentication from the brokering perspective. So a user gets a desktop brokered and will insert that certificate, which is short-lived. It's only an hour lived for that authentication. But the user will leverage other forms of multi-factor authentication to authenticate.
I think it can be considered as an MFA. Typically, with Verify, you have to know something, you have to handle something, and you have to be able to unlock something. So typically, VMware Verify helps you to consider your mobile device as a token. So it adds another way of securing authentication. And as we could see, you could even combine Verify with other ways of authenticating. So we could combine VMware Verify plus user password plus RSA plus Radius, and all combination could be done. If we are using Workspace ONE with the mobile SSO, we are in fact using already some combination between being able to check the certificates which are on devices, plus the ability to check for device compliance, and another way of authenticating if required. So we can have MFA and multiple authentications combined together. Yeah.
Any more questions? Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for being there. Thank you very much. Do not forget, if you can, to fill out your survey on your mobile device. Thank you very much again. Have a safe trip back home, and see you soon. Thank you.
Yeah.